It happened faster than anyone could have imagined. One moment, London's skyline shimmered with the glow of a warm evening. The next, tragedy struck from a height no one thought possible. Imagine being just steps away from laughter, music, and carefree conversations, only for the world to collapse in a single, devastating instant. That was the night Kate Middleton and Prince William's college classmate fell 100 feet from a rooftop bar in London. A fall so sudden and catastrophic it shook everyone who knew him, and even those who only knew his name through fleeting encounters. How could such a joyful evening end in horror? And why is this sending ripples all the way through the royal family itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Even before tragedy, life had been full for their classmate. Charismatic, ambitious, and known for a laugh that could light up a room, he had navigated the hallowed halls of one of Britain's most prestigious universities alongside William and Kate. They shared dorm rooms, late-night study sessions, and the kind of camaraderie that only a few people ever truly experience. The memories of their college days, pranks, debates, and quiet confidences, are now all that remain of a life cut far too short. And yet, despite these fond recollections, the events of that fateful night cast a shadow over every joyous anecdote, every inside joke, every shared triumph. But let's step back for a moment. The city itself was alive that night. London, with its towering glass buildings and crowded streets, had a rhythm all its own. Rooftop bars dotted the skyline, offering glittering panoramas and the kind of exclusivity that lured people into a sense of invincibility. Who could have imagined that a place meant for celebration could become a stage for tragedy? It's easy to dismiss such spaces as glamorous playgrounds for the elite, but tonight, the city became a silent witness to catastrophe. And when the news reached the royal family, the shock was immediate, the grief profound, and the questions unending. Kate and William were informed almost instantly, the message delivered with the clinical precision of protocol, but carrying the weight of personal grief. How does one respond to the sudden death of a close friend in public life, when private emotion collides with public expectation? The royals are trained to maintain composure, to present a front of dignity, yet no amount of training can prepare someone for such devastating news. And still, they had to decide how to share this loss with the world, how to honor a friend while navigating the scrutiny of the global stage. The ripple effect of the news was immediate. Media outlets, social media feeds, and the whispers of London's elite began to churn with speculation. Headlines flashed across screens. Royal classmate dies in tragic fall, and rooftop tragedy shocks London and the royals. The public's curiosity collided with compassion. Everyone wanted answers. Who was involved? What exactly happened? Could this have been prevented? Yet, for those closest to the event, the reality was far more complex, far more intimate, and far more heartbreaking than the headlines suggested. The fall wasn't just a statistic. It wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a culmination of choices, circumstances, and moments that no one could have predicted. But before we get to the fall itself, it's important to understand the person behind the headlines. Their life was more than a socialite's anecdote or a royal footnote. He was a friend, a confidant, someone who had left marks on everyone he met. College memories illustrate this vividly. Picture late nights in the common room, debates about philosophy and politics, bursts of laughter echoing through dorm halls. These were moments that defined him, shaped his relationships, and fostered bonds with William and Kate that lasted long beyond university. And yet, all of this seems almost surreal when contrasted with the suddenness of his death. How does one reconcile decades of friendship and shared history with a single moment of misfortune? As the night unfolded, little could have hinted at the looming disaster. The bar, perched high above London's bustling streets, gleamed under the soft glow of evening lights. Patrons moved between the open-air terrace and indoor lounge, sipping cocktails, exchanging laughter and stories, oblivious to the events about to transpire. The atmosphere was jubilant, carefree. Friends toasted milestones, strangers shared fleeting smiles, and the skyline reflected in countless glass panels seemed almost magical. Yet, beneath the glittering veneer, danger lurked, a misstep, a fragile railing, a moment of distraction. 1 second, everything was normal, The next, a life was gone. News of the fall traveled quickly, carried by bystanders, security personnel, and emergency responders. First responders arrived to a scene of chaos, trying to piece together what had happened. Witnesses described the moments before impact: laughter that suddenly stopped, gasps of horror, and the sickening sound that accompanies a fall too long, too fast. Social media erupted, live feeds captured the flashing lights of ambulances, and Londoners speculated in hushed tones about what could have gone wrong. Questions emerged. Was it an accident, a misstep, a lapse in safety, or something more sinister? And in the midst of it all, Kate and William were left grappling with a personal loss while under the public microscope. How do you mourn when millions are watching? And then there is the human element, the emotions that raw facts cannot convey. Friends and classmates described him as full of life, generous with his time, quick to offer support, and endlessly witty. His death left a void that can't be measured in news cycles or social media posts. One moment he was laughing, the next he was gone. The emotional weight of that shift is hard to convey, but it is what makes this story resonate beyond mere headlines. And it is precisely this human connection that makes the royal announcement so significant. When the monarchy speaks, it is not just protocol. It is a reflection of grief, memory, and the recognition of loss that transcends social boundaries. Yet, even with this backdrop, there are questions that linger, shadows that refuse to dissipate. The circumstances surrounding the fall are not as straightforward as they appear. There are conflicting reports, mysterious details, and subtle contradictions in witness statements. CCTV footage is being analyzed. Forensic teams are reviewing every angle. Friends and insiders hint at tensions, overlooked safety concerns, and unusual events leading up to the fall. Every layer peeled back reveals more complexity, more intrigue, more reasons to ask. Could this have been avoided? And what secrets, buried in plain sight, are waiting to emerge? The city itself seemed to pause. Londoners glanced upward, imagining the scene atop the rooftop bar, the height, the peril. Conversations quieted. Social media feeds slowed. Even the glittering metropolis, usually a stage for endless activity, seemed to hold its breath. And yet, for Kate and William, the pause was only temporary. Their reaction had to be swift, thoughtful, and precise. Public figures, privy to constant scrutiny, must navigate grief differently, yet they are human too. And in that delicate balance between private sorrow and public expectation lies the tension that would define the early hours of this tragedy. What makes this story resonate beyond the immediate death is its intersection with life's unpredictability, friendship, and loss. How do you honor someone whose life intertwined with yours at critical moments, yet ended so abruptly? How do you reconcile the joy of shared memories with the shock of absence? And most importantly, how do you navigate the aftermath when your grief is not only personal, but magnified by the lens of public attention? These questions hang over every detail of the unfolding narrative, making every revelation that follows not just news, but a deeply emotional journey. And here's the twist that most won't see coming. Initial reports only scratch the surface. There are elements of this story, decisions made minutes before the fall, interactions captured in fleeting glances, and messages sent on phones moments prior, that may rewrite what everyone thought they knew. The investigation, the friends, the family, and even Kate and William themselves are now entwined in a narrative that is far more complex, far more human, and far more shocking than the first headlines suggested. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What exactly happens when a night meant for laughter spirals into unthinkable tragedy? That's the question everyone is asking about that rooftop bar in central London, where Kate Middleton and Prince William's college classmate met his untimely end. The scene was set for an ordinary evening, yet every detail, the drinks poured, the music blaring, the laughter ringing, would play a role in the events that unfolded. Could anyone have predicted what would happen next? Could the tiniest misstep, the briefest distraction, lead to a 100-foot fall and a lifetime of consequences? The bar itself was iconic. Perched high above London's crowded streets, it offered an unparalleled view of the city's skyline. Patrons could see the Thames snaking through the metropolis, lights shimmering like stars below them. The atmosphere was one of exclusivity and celebration. VIP tables lined the terrace, and soft lighting accentuated the glass walls. The night air was warm, with a faint scent of roasted coffee and cocktails mingling with the cool breeze from the river. It should have been enchanting, magical even. But sometimes, magic comes with a hidden cost. The classmate arrived early, eager to meet friends and enjoy the skyline view. With his signature charm and an easy laugh, he immediately became the center of conversation. Those who knew him best recall that he had a way of making people feel at ease, a rare quality that drew people in. And on this night, he was surrounded by friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances of William and Kate, people whose names might not be recognized by the public, but whose presence lent a sense of gravity to the gathering. Everyone felt the excitement of being somewhere special. Everyone except, perhaps, fate itself. From the beginning, there were subtle signs of tension that most people didn't notice. A railing that looked sturdy enough for comfort, yet possibly weakened over time. Guests laughing and leaning casually against edges that weren't meant to bear weight. And then there was the alcohol, flowing freely, cocktails mixing with champagne, each glass a reminder that even a single lapse in judgment could have irreversible consequences. Can we really blame human error for what happened? Or was it the perfect storm of circumstance and environment? Minutes stretched into hours, and the laughter never ceased. Groups shifted from the terrace to the indoor lounge, from rooftop to bar stools. Conversations drifted from trivial gossip to recollections of university days with William and Kate. Some reminisced about all-nighters in the library, shared exams, and late-night debates on philosophy. Others recounted more personal stories, small kindnesses, moments of vulnerability, flashes of brilliance. And yet, as joyous as the evening was, there was an undercurrent of distraction. People checking their phones, eyes wandering to other parts of the bar, laughter occasionally punctuated by uneasy glances at gaps in the terrace or sudden gusts of wind. At some point, the fatal moment came. Details remained somewhat unclear, and conflicting eyewitness accounts paint slightly different pictures. One friend claims to have seen him leaning on a railing while reaching for a friend's drink. Another recalls a loud shout, a sudden pause in music, a collective gasp that seemed to freeze time. A single misstep, perhaps, a misplaced foot, a moment of imbalance, a hand slipping on slick metal, and suddenly, gravity takes over. For those on the terrace, it was instantaneous, a flash, a movement too quick to register fully, and then horror. The fall itself lasted seconds, but for those who witnessed it, the memory would stretch endlessly. Emergency response was immediate, yet the outcome seemed inevitable. Sirens cut through the night as paramedics rushed to the scene, but even their expertise could not undo the force of the fall. Witnesses described chaos, friends screaming, patrons frozen in shock, phones capturing moments that would later haunt them. Could anyone process this as it happened? Could anyone rationalize a tragedy so abrupt, so absolute, so unfair? Some tried. Most failed. Meanwhile, the royal connection added another layer of intensity. News reached Kate and William within minutes. Their immediate reaction is described as a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and a need for action. Private phone calls were made, messages sent, aides scrambled to gather information. It's one thing to hear about an accident affecting a stranger. It's another entirely when it touches someone you once shared dorm rooms with, late-night study sessions, private jokes, and formative moments of your youth. The grief was compounded by public expectation. How do you mourn a friend when every word and movement is scrutinized by millions? Yet the story does not rest solely on the tragedy itself. There are hints that the night was layered with contradictions, inconsistencies, and unexpected details. Witnesses report unusual interactions between the victim and other patrons. Some speak of tensions, subtle arguments, or moments of agitation that seemed trivial at the time. Others describe gestures or exchanges that, in hindsight, feel ominous. Even small elements, a misplaced chair, a railing that had been repaired poorly, the bar's lighting casting shadows in unusual ways, begin to take on greater significance. Were these merely coincidences, or were they harbingers of the accident to come? And what of the bar staff? Those on duty recall frantic activity as the evening unfolded. Mixologists and servers moved swiftly, balancing trays and glasses, unaware that the night's narrative would be forever altered. Security personnel attempted to monitor every corner, yet even their vigilance could not prevent the accident. The juxtaposition is stark, a place designed for pleasure, socializing, and elegance becoming a stage for disaster. Can planning and caution ever truly guard against fate? Social media, as always, responded with immediate intensity. Photos taken just minutes before the fall surfaced online, showing smiles and carefree attitudes now forever frozen in time. Tweets and posts speculated on what had happened, some filled with grief, others with morbid curiosity. Observers debated the causes, questioned safety measures, and speculated wildly about circumstances that would never fully be known. The juxtaposition of public fascination and private sorrow created a surreal atmosphere, one that would be amplified as the hours passed. Then there was the medical response. Paramedics arrived swiftly, navigating a crowded terrace and the logistical nightmare of a high-rise location. Every second was critical, every decision potentially life-saving. But the fall had been so severe, so violent, that survival seemed unlikely. The tragedy was compounded by the realization that nothing could truly reverse the moment. Friends, some of whom had studied and celebrated with him for years, watched helplessly as professionals worked, aware that the outcome was grim. Can words capture the helplessness of witnessing a life extinguished in a flash? What followed was a blur of official reports, police investigations, and initial media coverage. The details trickled out slowly, each new revelation more shocking than the last. Rumors began to circulate, fueled by social media and sensational headlines. Was it an accident? Was it preventable? Did alcohol or other factors play a role? Every new question seemed to raise more tension, more disbelief, more sorrow. The public's appetite for answers collided with the private grief of friends, family, and, of course, the royal couple. Amid this chaos, Kate and William were left to navigate a maze of personal and public responsibilities. They had to respond, to acknowledge the loss, to honor a friend, and to maintain composure. In private conversations, sources say, there were tears, whispered memories, and reflections on their shared past. In public statements, there was measured respect, acknowledgement, and solemnity. How does one balance personal devastation with the expectations of a world watching every move? It is a question few can answer, yet they had no choice but to try. And then came the first whispers of something deeper, something previously unnoticed. Friends reported small messages exchanged in the hours leading up to the tragedy, interactions that seemed trivial at the time but now take on a weight they never had before. Security footage is being reviewed for additional clues. Investigators are piecing together every angle, every movement, every decision. Each new detail adds layers to a story that is already complex, emotional, and impossible to fully comprehend. What was meant to be a night of celebration, a gathering among friends and acquaintances, became an event that would forever mark London's social landscape. Questions linger in every corner. Could it have been prevented? Was this the result of human error, environmental hazards, or something even more shocking? And for Kate and William, the grief is doubled by public scrutiny. Every statement, every gesture, every private visit to the hospital is analyzed, critiqued, and broadcast across the globe. The weight of personal loss collides with the glare of public attention. But perhaps the most haunting element of all is this. In the hours following the accident, an unexpected discovery changed everything. A detail so subtle it could have been overlooked, yet so profound it threatens to rewrite the narrative of the evening. What was found in the immediate aftermath, what messages were unearthed, what overlooked circumstances will shock everyone once revealed. The story is far from over, and the truth, as always, is stranger than anyone could imagine. And as London held its breath, the scene frozen in time, one thing was painfully clear. This was only the beginning of a story that would challenge perceptions, expose hidden tensions, and ultimately test the very resilience of those connected to the tragedy. The night of the fall was over, but the ripple effects were just beginning to spread. But what came next, the details that would emerge in the hours and days after the fall, would change everything again, and no one could have predicted the shock that awaited the royals, the city, and everyone who thought they knew the story. What do you do when tragedy lands on your doorstep, not in a metaphorical sense, but in the very real form of someone you once knew intimately. Imagine receiving the news that a close friend, someone you studied and laughed with during the formative years of your youth, has fallen to their death from a height no one could survive. That is the reality Kate Middleton and Prince William faced the night the news arrived. But how do you mourn privately while the world is already watching? And how do you make sense of sudden loss when it intersects with the unrelenting scrutiny of public life? By the time their aides had reached them with details, the royals were already processing the unimaginable. The messages were concise but devastating. Their classmate had died from a fall at a rooftop bar in central London. The words seemed almost impossible, like a surreal headline from a nightmare. William and Kate were struck not only by shock, but by the immediacy of the loss. For a friend you've known since college, a life you shared in laughter, long nights of study, and private conversations, there is no preparation for a call like this. And yet, they had to act. Decisions had to be made. The private grief that gnawed at their hearts had to be balanced against public responsibility. Immediately, a flurry of activity followed. Their aides, always trained for high-pressure scenarios, moved quickly to verify details, secure privacy, and prepare an official response. There is a protocol, certainly, an unspoken playbook for when members of the royal family are touched by tragedy. But there is no training for the sharp edge of personal loss, for the hollow feeling that accompanies the knowledge that someone who shared your history, your formative memories, is gone forever. William reportedly sank into a chair in quiet disbelief, while Kate was said to retreat briefly into the private quarters, tears streaming silently down her face. Their grief was private, raw, and unrelenting, yet within hours, it would have to be translated into a public statement, into words measured and precise enough to honor a life, while navigating the intense scrutiny of millions of viewers. What makes this reaction even more complex is the bond they shared with the deceased. William and Kate's college years were marked not only by academic achievement, but by social experiments in friendship and loyalty. They had survived the pressures of a competitive university, shared secrets, and built memories that would remain indelible for a lifetime. This classmate had been part of that tapestry, someone who had offered support during late-night breakdowns before exams, who had celebrated personal victories, who had been trusted with confidence and humor in equal measure. And now, that thread of shared history had been cut violently and irreparably. The first challenge was deciding how to inform the public. The monarchy exists in a space where personal tragedy cannot remain wholly private. Every action, every announcement, is scrutinized, debated, and dissected. Kate and William needed to honor the loss while maintaining dignity, while ensuring that the victim's family, friends, and colleagues were respected. Their aides drafted statements, balancing emotional resonance with formal restraint. Each word was weighed, tested, and revised. Even in a situation of personal devastation, the eyes of the world demanded a measured, public response. But even as they worked on messaging, there were private moments that revealed the depth of their humanity. Sources report whispered conversations between the couple, recalling late-night study sessions, pranks pulled on unsuspecting professors, and memories of a friend whose laughter had once filled every dorm corridor. They reminisced about the holidays spent in shared student housing, the minor disputes that now seemed trivial, and the quiet acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed in the rush of daily life. Each memory was a double-edged sword, comforting in its familiarity yet painful in the knowledge that no new memories could ever be made. And yet, amidst the grief, there was also urgency. Protocol demanded swift action, and the world outside was already circling with speculation. The media had begun to catch wind of the accident, and social media feeds were lighting up with conjecture, some compassionate, others morbidly curious. The royals had to respond before rumors spiraled out of control, all while processing the loss themselves. Could there have been a worse position to be in? To grieve in the public eye while managing the narrative? William and Kate reportedly consulted closely with close aides, family members, and legal advisors. They debated how much to reveal, which details would honor their friend without sensationalizing the tragedy, and how to navigate a landscape where every statement could become headline news. The decision was made to keep initial statements concise yet heartfelt, a recognition of loss, a nod to shared memories, and an acknowledgement of the profound grief that would be felt by all who knew the victim. Even so, the subtext was clear to those who read between the lines. The personal devastation, the heartbreak, and the struggle to maintain composure in the face of a loss that struck so close to home. But grief alone was not the only complication. There were practical considerations, logistical challenges that added stress to already raw emotions. Security teams had to coordinate with emergency responders, police reports needed verification, and communications teams monitored the flow of information across multiple platforms. The delicate balance between privacy and public duty required constant attention. Every step, every word, every gesture was under scrutiny. Even the smallest misstep could spark a scandal or an outcry. And yet, despite the pressures, the royals maintained their focus on the person at the center of this tragedy, the friend they had lost. Family and friends began to gather, seeking answers, offering comfort, and attempting to navigate their own grief. Kate reportedly spoke to several close friends of the deceased, listening to memories, offering condolences, and sharing in the sorrow. William coordinated with mutual acquaintances to ensure that information flowed accurately, that speculation was tempered, and that the deceased's family was supported in every way possible. Their actions reflected both empathy and prudence, demonstrating the dual role they were forced to occupy. Mourners and public figures, private and visible, personal and official. And while the immediate response was controlled, the emotional undercurrent was anything but. Insiders described moments of quiet reflection, brief flashes of anguish, and unspoken conversations heavy with meaning. Kate, known for her composure, was said to be visibly shaken, retreating occasionally to process the enormity of the event. William, equally affected, focused on coordination and communication, but could not hide the depth of his grief. These moments of vulnerability contrasted sharply with the public face the couple had to present, a balancing act between sorrow and protocol that few outsiders could comprehend. Then there were the moments of doubt and what-ifs, the questions that gnawed at the mind in the hours following the accident. Could something have been done to prevent it? Was there a detail overlooked, a warning missed, a step taken too casually? Even as they navigated grief, William and Kate had to confront the unsettling knowledge that tragedy, by its nature, is often arbitrary, unpredictable, and cruel. And yet, their attention to detail, their desire to honor their friend's memory, and their commitment to transparency required them to investigate, to question, and to act. The public announcement eventually went out, carefully crafted, measured, and full of respect. Kate and William acknowledged the loss, expressed condolences to the family, and highlighted the deceased's character, achievements, and contributions. Every word was chosen to convey authenticity, respect, and emotional resonance. And yet, beneath the surface of the public statement, a deeper story lurked. A story of private grief, unanswered questions, and secrets that only those closest to the events truly understood. Social media reacted almost immediately. Tributes poured in, ranging from heartfelt condolences to nostalgic recollections of college memories. Yet alongside genuine sorrow came speculation, conspiracy theories, and questions that the royals had no choice but to navigate delicately. How could they honor their friend's memory while the world dissected every detail, every sentence, every gesture? How could private mourning coexist with global attention? These were dilemmas unique to individuals in their position, yet universally relatable in the raw human experience of loss. Even as the hours passed, reports began to emerge suggesting that the circumstances surrounding the fall were more complex than initially reported. Witness accounts hinted at unexpected interactions on the terrace, fleeting conflicts, and environmental hazards that had gone unnoticed. For Kate and William, this information added layers of concern. Not only did they grieve, but they were now tasked with understanding what happened, why it happened, and how to navigate the aftermath responsibly. The pressure was immense, the stakes high, and the emotional weight crushing. And just when it seemed that the night's events had reached their tragic peak, a new piece of information surfaced that would shatter any sense of closure. A message, overlooked at first, revealed a side of the story that no one had anticipated. A detail so unexpected, so profoundly unsettling, it would challenge the narrative everyone thought they understood. What was discovered in those messages, And why had it been hidden until now? The answers promised to change not only the perception of the event, but the very understanding of the tragedy itself. The royal reaction, the public grief, the private sorrow, all of it now intersected with the first hints of mystery. The night had begun as a celebration, but its aftermath was proving far more complicated, emotional, and shocking than anyone could have imagined. And as the city of London continued to buzz with speculation, Kate and William's grief was compounded by the realization that their friend's death was not only tragic, but potentially far more complex than a simple accident. But the most shocking revelation was still to come, the detail that would shift the story from a tragedy to a mystery that demanded answers, one that would leave both the royals and the public reeling. Have you ever thought about the friendships that shape us, the people who leave indelible marks on our lives, and how quickly those connections can be severed by circumstances beyond our control? That is exactly the lens through which we must view the life of Kate Middleton and Prince William's college classmate. Before the tragedy, his life was full of laughter, ambition, and moments that seemed ordinary but would later be remembered with a profound sense of loss. Understanding who he was, the bonds he shared with William and Kate, and the experiences that defined him is key to grasping the emotional magnitude of that night. He wasn't just another name in a yearbook. From the moment he stepped on a campus, he stood out, not for arrogance or flamboyance, but for a quiet confidence and a magnetic charm that drew people to him. Friends recall his infectious laugh, the kind that made even the most stressful nights bearable. He had an uncanny ability to remember personal details about everyone he met, from favorite authors to obscure hobbies, and he used that skill to make people feel seen and appreciated. How often do we encounter people like that? And how often do we realize their significance only after they're gone? College life, especially at such a prestigious institution, was not without its pressures. Exams, expectations, and social hierarchies created a world that demanded resilience. Yet he navigated it with a mixture of diligence and ease, often helping classmates stay grounded during stressful periods. William and Kate, navigating the same halls, recognized in him someone they could trust, someone who would celebrate their successes and support them through challenges. Together, the three of them formed a small circle of camaraderie, a network of loyalty that would endure well beyond their university years. Late nights in the dormitory were a mixture of study, laughter, and whispered secrets. There were prank wars with neighboring dorms, late-night runs to the cafeteria, and philosophical debates that stretched until the early hours. These weren't just fleeting experiences. They were the foundation of a bond that intertwined personal histories and future expectations. In the quiet of a library, in the laughter of a shared joke, in the tensions of a heated debate, trust was built. And in hindsight, every ordinary moment from those years now feels precious, as though each laugh and every late-night conversation were quietly preparing them for the emotional gravity of what would come years later. Outside the classroom, his personality shone even more brightly. He was deeply involved in campus life, from student clubs to volunteer organizations, often taking roles that required diplomacy and leadership. Friends remember his willingness to mediate conflicts, to help organize events, and to ensure that everyone around him felt included. There was a subtle charisma to him, the kind that made others gravitate naturally toward his orbit, and a thoughtfulness that made even casual interactions memorable. He wasn't just present in the moments. He made those moments matter. Yet, beneath the surface, there were contradictions, tensions that, in retrospect, hinted at the complexities of his character. On one hand, he could be carefree and spontaneous, embracing opportunities without hesitation. On the other, he carried an inner restlessness, a curiosity that sometimes led him into riskier situations or unanticipated challenges. Friends often joked about his daring nature, laughing off his penchant for exploring rooftops, climbing sculptures, or walking the fine line between adventure and danger. Little did they know, those playful tendencies would intersect tragically with the night in question. How often do we see these traits in people we love, unaware of the shadows they might cast over our lives? His relationship with Kate and William was unique in its intimacy and informality. While the future King and Queen of England were navigating public perception and social pressures, their college friend offered a space of normalcy, a confidant who saw them as peers, not public figures in the making. Together, they shared moments of levity that transcended status, laughing at absurdities, offering candid advice, and sharing vulnerabilities rarely revealed outside their inner circle. These bonds were forged in the crucible of youth and education, strengthened by trust and shared experience, and now serve as a stark reminder of what was lost. Family and friends frequently describe his generosity of spirit, whether it was tutoring a struggling classmate, organizing impromptu gatherings to celebrate minor victories, or simply offering a listening ear. He was the person people relied upon without realizing how deeply they were entwined in his orbit. And when tragedy struck, it became evident just how many lives had been touched, how many relationships had been nurtured, and how profound the loss would be, not just for the royals, but for everyone who had ever counted on his presence. What adds to the poignancy of this story is the contrast between his vitality and the suddenness of his death. Here was someone vibrant, full of life, with a future that seemed boundless. Plans were being made, ambitions were being pursued, and yet, in a single moment, all potential was erased. That is the cruel irony of life, and it is what makes the tragedy so universally relatable. We all know people like him, those whose presence enhances a room, whose laughter is infectious, whose absence leaves a void that echoes long after they are gone. Even small details from his daily routine speak volumes. He had a habit of noting small victories in a notebook, capturing fleeting thoughts, and occasionally sharing them with close friends. The notes, now being sifted through by those closest to him, reveal a personality at once thoughtful, reflective, and imbued with humor. They show a man deeply engaged with the world around him, aware of its beauty, its absurdities, and its unpredictable nature. How ironic that such mindfulness could not guard against the randomness of the night that would end his life. And the moments shared with William and Kate? They now carry a weight that transcends nostalgia. Anecdotes of study sessions, weekend trips, and casual evenings spent in conversation are tinged with bittersweet recognition. Every memory is a reminder of joy, connection, and the stark fragility of life. Friends recall late-night confessions, shared dreams, and moments of levity that would later become treasured memories. These recollections are not merely sentimental. They are evidence of a bond that was profound, multifaceted, and tragically cut short. But there is another layer to these relationships, one that complicates the narrative of tragedy with subtle hints of tension, unspoken rivalries, and the human propensity for secrecy. College, for all its camaraderie, is also a stage for ambition, competition, and private ambitions. There were moments when disagreements flared, when friendships were tested by differing priorities, and when secrets were kept, small but significant, that shaped interpersonal dynamics. None of these were sinister in their intent, but in retrospect, they illustrate the complexity of human relationships and the delicate balance between trust and personal ambition. The tragedy casts these complexities into sharp relief. In trying to understand the night of the fall, one must consider not only the environmental and circumstantial factors, but also the history of relationships, the shared experiences, and the subtle dynamics that define these interactions. Was the victim's natural curiosity a factor? Did a sense of comfort among friends contribute to risk-taking? These questions are not meant to assign blame. They are meant to frame the reality of human behavior, the unpredictability of circumstance, and the profound weight of loss. And yet, for all the reflection and analysis, there is also a universal truth. Life is unpredictable, fragile, and fleeting. The laughter that once filled dormitory halls, the quiet conversations that offered solace during stress, the moments of joy shared among friends. All of it serves as a reminder that our time is limited and precious. For William and Kate, these reflections are intensified by the stark contrast between public duty and private grief. They are reminded, painfully, that life's brevity spares no one, regardless of status, circumstance, or intention. As we consider the life he lived, it becomes clear why this tragedy resonates so deeply. It is not merely the fall itself that shocks. It is the vivid tapestry of a life well lived, abruptly ended. Friends, colleagues, and the royals themselves are left grappling with the duality of memory, celebrating joy, confronting loss, and seeking meaning in events that defy understanding. How do you honor a friend when the narrative is so fractured? How do you reconcile grief with the public scrutiny that accompanies such a high-profile connection? And yet, there is an even more intriguing angle emerging. Recent reports suggest that some overlooked details from college days, seemingly innocuous moments, cryptic messages, and unreported interactions, may shed light on the victim's character in ways previously unconsidered. Could these hints from the past explain behaviors on the night of the fall? Are there lessons hidden in old interactions that suddenly take on new significance? Investigators and insiders alike are beginning to dig into this, and the answers may be both surprising and unsettling. For now, what stands out most is the human story. The laughter, the trust, the shared triumphs, and private struggles. All these elements create a portrait of someone extraordinary. And in the shadow of the rooftop tragedy, the depth of his life becomes more apparent, more tangible, and more haunting. It is a reminder that every life is intricate, layered, and significant, and that the sudden loss of such a life leaves an echo that resonates far beyond the immediate circle of friends. But even as we honor the memories, we cannot ignore the unanswered questions that linger. The details of that night, the sequence of events, and the decisions made in fleeting moments, all of it points to a complexity that will only be unraveled slowly. And lurking in the periphery is a revelation that promises to reshape everything we think we know about that evening. The story is far from over, and the next chapters will reveal twists that are at once shocking, emotional, and impossible to ignore. What came next would take the tragedy from sorrow to an emotional labyrinth, one that would test not just the friends and family involved, but also the royals themselves. How does one even begin to explain a fall from 100 feet? Could it truly have been an accident, or is there something deeper hidden in the shadows of that rooftop bar? The questions that investigators began to ask the morning after the tragedy were as urgent as they were complex. Each piece of evidence, each witness account, each minute detail became critical in constructing a timeline of what happened that night. And what they uncovered would not only shock London, but also reverberate through the lives of Kate Middleton, Prince William, and everyone connected to the victim. The first challenge for investigators was understanding the physical environment of the bar. Rooftop bars, by design, are meant to evoke a sense of openness and luxury. But they also introduce risks that are easy to underestimate. Narrow terraces, glass barriers that appear sturdy but have weight limits, and high ledges that invite casual leaning. Early reports suggested that the railing where the classmate had been standing appeared intact, yet closer examination revealed subtle weaknesses. There were signs of wear, screws that had loosened, and minor structural imperfections that might have gone unnoticed by staff or guests. Could a small defect, compounded by human error, have caused the fall? The experts were determined to find out. Witness accounts were equally complicated. Some saw him laughing with friends, carefree, reaching for a drink or gesturing toward the skyline. Others reported brief moments of tension, gestures that seemed inconsequential at the time, but in hindsight, they may have contributed to the accident. One patron mentioned a sudden gust of wind, another a misplaced chair, and yet another a glass that had tipped over moments before the fall. Each of these elements, individually minor, became magnified in the reconstruction of events. It's often the combination of small factors that produces catastrophe, and this seemed to be a textbook example. Then there were the security camera feeds. The footage was grainy in parts, blurred in others, but it captured enough to suggest movement patterns, interactions, and the exact sequence of events leading up to the fall. Investigators painstakingly pieced together these frames, replaying seconds over and over. What initially seemed like a straightforward accident became layered with ambiguity. There were moments where the victim leaned casually on the railing, moments where his balance shifted unexpectedly, and moments where nearby friends reacted too late to prevent disaster. Each frame raised new questions. Was it simply misjudgment, or had external factors played a role? Forensic analysis added another dimension. Impact points were examined meticulously. The angle of descent, the injuries sustained, and the distribution of force all contributed to understanding how the fall occurred. Medical experts concluded that the height and velocity made survival virtually impossible. But they also noted subtle details suggesting that the fall may have included a moment of rotational movement, a slight twisting in midair. Was this simply physics at work, or did it indicate some attempt to regain balance, however futile? The technical details were chilling, emphasizing the finality of the accident and the fragility of human life. Investigators also began to look at behavioral patterns leading up to the accident. Alcohol consumption was a factor, though not in the way tabloids would later sensationalize. The classmate had a drink or two, but nothing excessive, according to witnesses. The question shifted instead to decision-making under casual impairment, distraction, and social comfort. How often do we underestimate the effect of slight lapses in attention, especially in environments designed to thrill and impress? Could a single moment of inattentiveness have been enough to set off an irreversible chain of events? And yet, the story took a darker turn when more personal elements emerged. A friend disclosed a message sent to the victim earlier that evening, referencing a minor dispute at the bar, an argument about seating arrangements, trivial on its surface, but tense enough to create brief agitation. Could that fleeting irritation have contributed to a misstep? Investigators were forced to weigh every detail, even those that seemed inconsequential, understanding that in accidents of this magnitude, the smallest trigger can matter. Another puzzling revelation involved the layout of the bar itself. While patrons believed the terrace was secure, inspection revealed subtle design flaws. Certain tiles were slightly uneven, the glass barriers were mounted at varying heights, and drainage systems created small, slick surfaces. Combined with a moment of distraction, these factors could easily result in a catastrophic fall. But here's the twist. Staff maintenance logs indicated recent repairs had been made, yet some of these had been done hastily, without comprehensive structural reinforcement. Was this negligence, oversight, or just an unfortunate coincidence? The investigators' interviews with witnesses revealed another layer of complexity, contradictory accounts. Some patrons remembered the victim leaning toward a friend, laughing and unaware of danger. Others said they saw him glance toward the edge, perhaps hesitating. Differences in perception are natural, but they complicated the narrative, leaving room for uncertainty. Even experienced forensic experts acknowledged that reconstructing such a rapid event, with dozens of variables and imperfect memory, was like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. Amid these technical analyses, the emotional dimensions could not be ignored. Friends who had shared dorm rooms, private jokes, and late-night study sessions were called upon to recount what they saw. The weight of reliving the incident was almost unbearable. One friend described a moment of frozen disbelief, the sensation of time slowing as the fall occurred, the horror in realizing that nothing could be done to save him. Another spoke of guilt, questions of whether a joke, a nudge, or a momentary lapse in attention could have played a role. Grief and investigation intertwined, creating a psychological storm for all involved. And then there was the most unnerving revelation: traces of a third-party interaction in the moments before the fall. Investigators noted subtle movements captured on video that suggested another person had been in close proximity. A hand brushing against a shoulder, a brief exchange of words, a shift in the crowd that caused a slight jostle. It was nothing conclusive, yet enough to raise questions about environmental influence. Could an unintended gesture from someone else have triggered the fatal misstep? Or was this simply the chaotic flow of a crowded social space? The line between accident and external influence blurred in a way that was impossible to ignore. Medical examiners confirmed the fall's lethality within minutes. Injuries indicated a single, high-velocity impact, consistent with a straight drop from the rooftop. Yet they also noted subtle signs of defensive movements, suggesting the victim may have instinctively tried to protect himself, perhaps twisting his body or flailing briefly. These tiny reactions, human and natural, underscore the tragedy. In those last moments, awareness and instinct collided, but the force of gravity was overwhelming. It is a stark reminder of the helplessness of human beings against the unforgiving laws of physics. Despite the meticulous reconstruction, one aspect remained elusive: the exact moment the fall began. Witnesses' recollections conflicted, security footage was imperfect, and environmental variables, wind gusts, uneven surfaces, minor obstructions, complicated the timeline. Investigators were left with a series of hypotheses, each plausible, yet none providing total certainty. Was it a misjudged movement? A slip? A momentary loss of balance exacerbated by environmental and social factors? The truth, it seemed, was as layered and complex as the city itself. And yet, amid all the technical details and analysis, the emotional dimension persisted. For William and Kate, the findings were a brutal reminder that even careful, measured lives are not immune to randomness. The sequence of events reconstructed by investigators highlighted the fragility of life in a way that was nearly unbearable. It wasn't just an accident. It was a collision of circumstances, human choices, and the indifferent forces of the environment. But even with every detail examined, another revelation was waiting to surface, one that would transform the narrative from a tragic accident into a story with deeper questions, hidden motives, and secrets that had been obscured until this investigation. Something in those security logs, those witness statements, and those forensic reconstructions hinted at a layer nobody had anticipated. A detail that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the fall, and perhaps change the way the world viewed the events that night. What came next would challenge perceptions, unsettle assumptions, and bring the investigation into territories no one expected. How does a single, tragic event ripple through a city as vast and vibrant as London? When news broke of the fall from the rooftop bar, it wasn't just a headline. It was a seismic jolt that reverberated through the streets, offices, social circles, and newsrooms of the capital. The city that never sleeps seemed to pause, if only for a fleeting moment, as citizens tried to reconcile the horrifying reality. Someone had plummeted 100 feet to their death, and that someone was intimately connected to Kate Middleton and Prince William. From the moment the news hit the wire, London reacted with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and grief. News vans rushed to the scene, their lights cutting through the night as reporters scrambled for statements. Pedestrians stopped mid-step, craning their necks toward the bar above, wondering how such a tragedy could happen in the heart of one of the world's busiest cities. Social media erupted. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook became inundated with eyewitness accounts, photographs, videos, and instant theories. Some were heartbroken, mourning the loss of a young life. Others speculated wildly about the circumstances, fueled by incomplete information and the human desire to find explanations, even if none existed yet. The press, both tabloids and respected outlets, faced an unprecedented challenge: how to report the tragedy without sensationalizing it, while also satisfying a public appetite for details. Headlines flashed across screens, each one trying to encapsulate the horror and gravity in just a few words. Rooftop tragedy shocks London. Royal classmate falls to death. Night of laughter turns fatal. The urgency of reporting clashed with the complexity of the truth, and in the resulting chaos, misinformation began to creep in. Some stories exaggerated circumstances, others misidentified witnesses, and a few even implied negligence where none could yet be proven. The city's media ecosystem became a pressure cooker of speculation, emotion, and relentless scrutiny. Meanwhile, the social networks of the deceased were thrown into turmoil. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances who had shared mundane, ordinary moments, study sessions, casual dinners, late-night walks, now faced the unthinkable reality that someone they had counted on, laughed with, and confided in was gone. Messages poured in from all directions: texts from stunned classmates, emails from colleagues, calls from distant friends. Each one carried a different tone: shock, disbelief, grief, guilt, and added to the emotional gravity of the unfolding story. How does a community collectively process grief when the event is both sudden and highly public? Even the more distant residents of London were affected. The tragedy became a topic of discussion on trains, in offices, at pubs, and in cafes. Strangers speculated on the event, debated safety measures at high-rise venues, and reflected on the randomness of life. There was an undercurrent of fear. If this could happen to someone connected to the royal family, someone vibrant and full of promise, could it happen to anyone? The collective consciousness of the city shifted, even if only temporarily, as everyone grappled with the fragility of existence. In the midst of this, Kate Middleton and Prince William's involvement intensified attention. Their personal connection made the tragedy impossible to ignore. Royal watchers, paparazzi, and journalists scrutinized every statement and every public appearance. When they released their carefully worded message expressing grief and condolences, the public response was immediate. Tributes flooded social media, with many expressing admiration for the sensitivity and composure the couple demonstrated while mourning a friend. Yet, alongside admiration came speculation. Were there details they were withholding? Could their response reveal clues about the circumstances that led to the fall? Every action, no matter how private, was now interpreted through the lens of public fascination. Even more intriguing were the interactions among London's elite social circles. Invitations to private memorial gatherings circulated quickly, with attendees expressing a mix of sorrow, curiosity, and anxiety. Those who had attended the bar that night were particularly shaken, recalling fleeting moments, whispered conversations, or sudden shuffles that seemed insignificant at the time. The intertwining of social hierarchies, friendships, and the tragic incident created a complex web of emotions, obligations, and tensions. Everyone involved, royals, friends, bystanders, was now part of a story that had captured the imagination and concern of a city. The public's fascination wasn't limited to just social media or gossip columns. The tragedy prompted real conversations about urban safety, the responsibilities of high-rise venues, and the regulations governing rooftop access. Politicians and safety inspectors were called upon to review building codes, ensure proper barriers, and assess the risks inherent in such social spaces. The incident became a case study in risk, liability, and preventive measures, illustrating how a single, unforeseen event can create ripples that affect not just individuals, but an entire community. But alongside policy and procedure, there was a more visceral, emotional reaction. People mourned collectively in ways that transcended friendship or acquaintance. Vigils were organized, candles lit, flowers placed near the bar, and messages of remembrance shared online and in person. Even those who did not know the victim personally felt the weight of the event, the fragility of life, and the random cruelty of fate. The city became a landscape of reflection, of human connection, of grief both intimate and public. Yet not all reactions were measured. As often happens in the wake of public tragedy, sensationalism began to creep in. Rumors emerged about potential negligence, whether environmental, structural, or personal. Some speculated about a dispute at the bar, others suggested possible intoxication or risky behavior. These narratives, unverified and sometimes contradictory, spread rapidly. How does one navigate grief when it's accompanied by suspicion, rumor, and public conjecture? For those closest to the victim, these layers of narrative only intensified emotional distress, complicating mourning with frustration and disbelief. And then there was the most unnerving ripple of all, the effect on the media surrounding the royal family. Newsrooms were flooded with requests for statements, interviews, and access to sources. Every detail from college days was dredged up. Former classmates, professors, and social acquaintances were questioned relentlessly, often without regard for their privacy. Even trivial anecdotes became newsworthy. The combination of tragedy, celebrity association, and public curiosity created a feedback loop that intensified emotional stakes, magnified scrutiny, and left little room for private grieving. For Kate and William, this was particularly agonizing. They had to manage their grief while navigating the relentless gaze of the public and media. Reports suggest that they held private discussions about how much to reveal, what to protect, and how to maintain respect for the deceased and his family. At the same time, they were aware that the city's eyes were upon them, waiting for every gesture, every appearance, every word to be scrutinized. The pressure was immense. Balancing private sorrow with public responsibility is no small feat, and every decision carried weight far beyond the moment. Amid the public mourning, something unexpected began to surface: stories of the deceased's character, humor, and generosity. Social media accounts shared anecdotes from college days, tales of late-night study marathons, quiet acts of kindness, and bursts of wit that had endeared him to everyone he met. These stories, circulating in real time, created a portrait of someone larger than the tragedy itself, reminding Londoners, and the world, that behind every headline lies a person, a life, and a network of memories. But as these narratives emerged, another twist revealed itself. Reports suggested that some witnesses to the fall were now hesitant to speak openly. Conflicting accounts, perceived inconsistencies, and fears of public judgment created tension within the social circle. Some accounts hinted at minor disputes, subtle interactions, and moments of agitation that had gone unnoticed during the evening. These details, though seemingly insignificant, added layers of complexity to the investigation and the public narrative. Was the fall purely accidental, or did unseen social dynamics play a role?